My own family stole from me and abandoned me. What happened next will surprise you. I never thought I'd end up here, writing in a public space to share things that, until recently, I'd hidden even from myself. But there comes a point when your throat tightens, your chest weighs, and you feel like if you don't get it out, it'll explode. My name is Reginaldo. I'm 42 years old, and for almost my entire life, I've lived to please and support a family that never saw me as a real person. I've always been the responsible one, the organized one, the one with a level head. It sounds like a compliment, but in practice, it was the sentence that put me in an invisible prison. And when I say prison, I don't mean bars, but that silent and then explicit demand that I had to solve everything, pay for everything, fix everything. I believed this was love, that this was how you showed care, until the day I realized I was just being used. I remember exactly the day I realized the line had been crossed once and for all. It was a Sunday family lunch, like so many others that had already left me exhausted. Everyone gathered together. Laughter, that forced atmosphere of harmony that only lasted until the last bite of dessert was gone. When I got home that night, I turned on my phone and saw strange messages from the bank. I ran to check my account and gasped. Practically all my money was gone. It had been years of effort, planning, sleepless nights, saving every penny to try for a more peaceful future. I was shaking, my hands were sweating, my heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. At first, I thought it was a system error, external fraud. But the truth punched me in the gut when I called my sister Swelly and heard, with the greatest naturalness in the world, "Relax, bro, we needed it more than you." Who? Her and her husband, Clovis. I was speechless. She added, "That's what family is for, right?" It was like a knife stab, but worse than her confession was my parents' reaction when I sought help. I was desperate, trying to explain that it was theft, that I had plans, that I couldn't just take my money as if it were an endless allowance. My mother, Nada, looked at me with that falsely calm expression and said, "Oh, Reginaldo, you're so strong. You've always handled everything. You're not going to lose yourself now because of this." I swallowed hard, hoping my father, Adamar, would at least give me support. But he just shook his head and said, "They have more needs than you. Accept it and that's it." It was at that moment that a feeling of utter abandonment overcame me. It wasn't just the money. It was the confirmation that I was never seen as a son, a brother, or a man, but merely as a provider, a human safe. I left there, unable to drive properly, my vision blurred with anger and unshed tears. The following days were hell. I would wake up feeling heavy, unwilling to get out of bed, but compelled to keep working to replace what had been taken away. Every call I received from Swelly or Clovis was a new excuse, a new emotional blackmail, always with that "those who have more have to help" speech. My mother would call later, trying to calm me down, but always pushing the responsibility onto me. "You're the sensible one, don't fight, let it go." My father, then, seemed to delight in belittling me, as if I were wrong for wanting to keep what was mine. I felt alone, suffocated, as if I had nowhere to run. My mind wouldn't stop. Anger gnawed at me, but along with it came a crushing guilt. Was I really selfish? Should I just accept it? This doubt kept me awake. In the early hours of the morning, lying in the dark, I would break out in a cold sweat, remembering every humiliation, every time I swallowed hard to avoid starting a fight. I almost believed the problem was me. But something changed inside me when, one random night, after yet another argument on the phone, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. I had dark circles. Under my eyes, my face was haggard, and it looked like I'd aged 10 years in just a few months. And then I realized, if I continued like that, I would end up destroyed, penniless, unhealthy, and without dignity. I was afraid, terribly afraid, because facing my own family felt like an endless war. But I also felt a different kind of anger, a strength that came from a place I hadn't known existed. That was the day I decided I was no longer going to be my family's bank. I didn't know exactly how. I didn't have a ready-made plan, but I understood I needed to react because if I didn't do anything, no one would ever respect me. And that's when my life began to change, even though at first it hurt much more than I imagined. My family's first reaction when I started asserting myself was mockery. I arrived at my parents' house one day, determined to get serious. I said I wasn't going to pay Sueli's bills anymore, that I wasn't going to take on any debt, and that I wanted my money back. My sister's response was a mocking laugh. "You've always been too proper, now you want to play tough? Relax, Reginaldo, we'll figure it out later." My father sided with her, as always, and my mother just sighed, telling me I was overreacting. I was shaking with nerves, my mouth dry, my throat tight. It was like screaming in the middle of a fire, and no one could hear you. The feeling of helplessness crushed me, but something inside me wouldn't let me back down. I left there certain that if I wanted peace, I would have to fight alone. I began gathering evidence, bank statements, cell phone messages, unauthorized transfers. It was a painful process, because every time I read those conversations, I relived the humiliation. Sometimes I'd stop in the middle of the night, my hands shaking, wondering if I really had the courage to report my own family. The psychological toll was incredible. I'd remember the Christmas parties, the small good memories that still lingered, and my heart would sink. But soon, the memory of the empty account, the mockery, and my parents' indifference would come back. I'd ask myself, if they don't feel sorry for destroying me, why should I feel sorry for protecting myself? That phrase echoed in my mind, helping me carry on. The day I walked into the police station was one of the hardest of my life. I was in a cold sweat from start to finish, afraid of the judgment, of people's gazes, of the idea of being seen as someone who betrayed his own family. I felt like a knife was stuck in my chest, but I signed the papers anyway. When I handed over the evidence, the police chief looked at me seriously and said, "You have courage. Few would do that." I didn't know if that was a compliment or a sad realization. I left with shaky legs, almost tripping on the sidewalk. It was as if the whole world had become heavier, but at the same time, I breathed a new air, a breath of freedom I had never felt before. It was contradictory, pain and relief combined. The reaction at home was predictable, but it still devastated me. Sueli called me screaming, calling me a monster, an ungrateful person, saying I was destroying the family for money. Clovis joined in, threatening me, saying I would regret it. My mother cried, begging me to withdraw the complaint, saying that family doesn't go to court. And my father, cold as ever, accused me of being a traitor. I would hang up the phone and sit in the dark of my room, my chest racing, sometimes wanting to vomit. My body reacted as if I were at war. I thought about giving up repeatedly, but each time I remembered my haggard face in the mirror, I knew there was no turning back. In the following months, the pressure mounted. They tried to turn things around. They told the neighbors I was ambitious, that I wanted to get rid of them, that I'd turn my back on those who raised me. I walked the neighborhood streets feeling like I was being watched, as if everyone was talking. But at the same time, I began to feel something different, an inner silence that hadn't existed before. I no longer answered as many calls, no longer rushed to please. I began investing time in myself. I started therapy, started walking again, bought books I'd always wanted to read, but never had the time. It was strange at first, like a stranger in my own life, but little by little, the emptiness my family left began to give way to something new, the feeling that I finally had my own place. I won't lie, there was a night I cried like a baby. The loneliness weighed heavily. I wondered if I was overreacting, if I wasn't the problem. The whole family was against me, the neighbors whispered, my phone almost always ringing with someone pressuring me. I felt a tightness in my chest that sometimes turned into physical pain. My therapist said it was pent-up anxiety, that my body was screaming for what I'd never let out. I had bouts of insomnia, stared at the ceiling, remembering every situation where I should have said no and instead said yes. It was like rewatching a horror movie, except the monsters were the people who were supposed to love me. Still, there was a part of me that clung to the idea that I deserved more, even if I had to pay the price of loneliness. It was around this time that I realized who was truly paying attention to me. Kelly, Clovis's sister, texted me privately one day. She wasn't close, always staying in the background during get-togethers, but she surprised me. She said she'd seen from the outside how much I was being sucked in by my family, and that, although she didn't want to get involved, she admired my courage. I read that message several times. It was the first time in months that someone acknowledged my pain without accusing me. I cried alone after reading it, but it was a cry of relief, like someone had turned on a little light in the darkness. It wasn't much, but it gave me extra strength to carry on. The legal proceedings began. It wasn't quick, nor easy. Each hearing was torture. Facing my sister looking at me as if I were the enemy, my brother-in-law trying to play the victim, my parents with their arms crossed, cold. It was like being slapped in the face by invisible slaps. I sat in that chair in a cold sweat, waiting to be called, my mind racing with 1,000 possibilities. What if they win? What if I end up alone forever? But at the same time, it was in these moments that I remembered what had brought me there. The mirror, the feeling of death in life. It kept me seated, steady, even though inside I was shattered. Outside of court, I began rebuilding my routine. I learned to cook simple meals and started taking care of my home in a way I never had before, because before I was always rushing around solving other people's problems. Strangely, the silence that had previously suffocated me began to feel comforting. I would put on some soft music, sit on the couch and think, this is mine, no one will take it away. I also started writing short notes in a notebook as a way to organize my mind. I didn't show it to anyone, but it was a way to remind myself every day that I was choosing my life. Each written word was like a new brick in the construction of who I was trying to be. Of course, it wasn't all uphill. There were days when I fell hard. I wasted money trying to fill the void. I isolated myself too much. I failed to respond to people who truly cared. But the difference is that now I could see these mistakes as part of the process, not a sentence. Before, I lived on autopilot, nullifying myself for others. Now, even when stumbling, I knew I was on the path to freedom. With each stumble, I took a deep breath and reminded myself, I will never be my family's bank again. This mantra, repeated over and over, kept me going when everything seemed to be falling apart. One of the hardest moments was when I accidentally ran into my mother on the street. She looked at me with teary eyes and said, "You destroyed our family." It was like being punched in the soul. I froze, unresponsive, my throat closing. My first urge was to justify myself, to explain again that I wasn't the one who destroyed anything, that I'd just stopped being exploited. But I realized it was no use. She didn't want to understand. She just wanted to blame me. I walked away quickly, my heart pounding, and cried like a baby when I got home. It hurt, but it also reassured me that I was on the right path. If even my mother preferred a comfortable lie to facing the truth, I had nothing left to lose. Little by little, I began to notice changes within myself. At first, I felt small, like a traitor, but over time, this narrative began to unravel. I began to see that for the first time, I had control over my choices. I was no longer held hostage by Swaley's blackmail or my father's veiled orders. It was strange because I had never experienced this before. The freedom, at first, felt like loneliness, but over time, it became relief. I woke up without that automatic feeling of heaviness, without the constant fear of what hole I would have to plug next. My body also responded. I slept better, my skin improved, even the headache that had plagued me for years began to disappear. I started to see small victories that I'd previously ignored. I remember paying my own bills at the end of the month and realizing that, for the first time in years, I didn't have to cover anyone's debt. I stared at my online statement in disbelief, as if it were a scene from a movie. I put my phone away and started laughing to myself, a nervous laugh, but full of relief. They were small things, but they showed me that I was finally building a life of my own. With each passing month, without calls asking for money, without manipulation, it was as if I breathed deeper, as if the air were lighter. Of course, the ghosts still visited me. Sometimes in the silence of the night, I remembered my family together and felt a longing for what could have been if they had chosen love over exploitation. It hurt to know I never truly had a safe haven. But in those moments, I tried to shift my focus. Instead of looking at what I'd lost, I tried to value what I was building. And this wasn't easy. It was a daily exercise, almost a mental struggle. Sometimes I lost, giving in to sadness. Other times, I managed to take a deep breath and remind myself that even without them, I still had myself. And that was more than I had before. The biggest turning point came when I realized I no longer needed to prove anything to them. I had spent years trying to be the good son, the good brother, the strong one. When I finally understood that none of that brought me true love, it was like a chain breaking. I didn't need to convince anyone of my truth. I just needed to live according to it. That simple thought changed everything. Anger began to give way to a timid peace, still fragile but real. I began to believe that the future could be different, that I wasn't condemned to repeat the same story for the rest of my life. One day I realized I'd built a routine I hadn't even imagined before. I woke up, drank my coffee slowly, in no rush to please anyone. I walked around the neighborhood, feeling the sun on my face, read my books and wrote about my thoughts. These little things made me feel like I owned my own life, something I had never felt before. I realized that for the first time, I was making choices based on what felt good to me, not what my family expected of me. And this was liberating and frightening at the same time. Liberating because I finally had autonomy, frightening because for years I had lived hostage to their approval. With each step I took, my self-esteem grew. I no longer needed to justify saying no when asked for money or favors. I learned that saying no isn't selfish, it's self-respect. At first it hurt, because the yelling and accusations continued, and my mind filled with guilt. But gradually, I began to understand that it wasn't my fault. I was building boundaries, and this hurt others, not me. Over time, anger and frustration gave way to a sense of quiet empowerment, the power to choose my life without depending on the approval of those who only exploited me. Today, I look back on everything I've been through and still get emotional. The nights of tears, the fear, the feeling of absolute loneliness. None of it was in vain. I learned that standing up to your own family when they use you isn't weakness, it's courage. I discovered that my strength wasn't in carrying the weight of the world, but in learning to say no, to protect myself, to seek my own happiness. Every step in rebuilding my life, every small victory, every moment of peace achieved was proof that it's possible to break cycles, even when they seem indestructible. There are still open wounds, painful memories, moments that make me tremble. I don't pretend everything is perfect, because it isn't, but there's a huge difference. Today, I know that my pain doesn't define my life. I can feel, cry, and be discouraged, but still move forward. And that's freedom. Freedom to choose my paths, my friends, my routine, my values. Freedom to no longer be a human safe for those who only want to exploit me. I finally learned that peace isn't the absence of problems. It's the ability to live with them without letting them destroy me. If I could say one thing to anyone reading this who feels trapped, exploited, or alone, There is a way out. There is strength within you, even when it seems like everything around you is conspiring against you. Breaking cycles hurts, scares, and requires courage, but it is possible. Every tear, every stumble, every fear faced is worth it when you realize you're choosing your own life. I'm Reginaldo, and after years of emotional and financial abuse, I've finally found myself again. And I can say with all sincerity, saying no, setting limits, fighting. For yourself, it's the purest form of self-love. I've overcome, and I'm still overcoming, step by step, but I'm free, and no one can ever take that away.